Hello, I'm your host, Braylon Williams, and welcome to another episode of Enneagram Story Podcast. For my faithful listeners, thank you for listening once again. For new listeners, I hope you enjoy this episode. It's hard to believe, but we've made it to the last type for season 1. Next week, I'll be doing a season 1 recap episode. But for today, I want to talk about all the basics of type 7, the levels of health for type 7, and a little bit briefly about 7s and relationships. Okay, so let's dive right in. So let's start by looking at all the basics about type 7 people, or as I like to call them, the adventure people. I don't know what that was, but type 7s are extroverted. Type 7s are extroverted. They're optimistic, busy, and spontaneous people. Some characteristics of a type 7 is that they want to avoid pain. They are vulnerable to addiction. They are experts at putting a spin on things. They don't want to be tied down, and they live for the next adventure. That's why I like to call them adventure people. Okay, so let me just say this from the very outset of this episode. I know this week is a double feature week, and I'm releasing 2 episodes in one day. So I'm really going to try to not go on so many tangents in this episode. But here's a little, PSA, a little bit of a shameless plug. If you have not listened to episode 13, go ahead and listen to it. It also released today. So just stop this episode where you are, click back to 13, listen to that, then come back to this episode. It's going to be fit, and you'll really like it if you do that. Maybe. What do I know? I'm just a voice talking on a microphone about information. But you do you, honey, boo. But anyway, back to type 7s. As kids, type 7 pick up on this windy message that you're on your own. No one's here to support or take care of you. So 7s respond by saying, I'll do it if no one else will. So no one else is going to, provide for me. I will. But how I provide for myself might just take me on a little fun adventure. I might just need some milk from Walmart, but I'm going to drive this way and look at this scenery. And then I'm going to go to Walmart, and I might, walk around the store a few times before I actually get the milk and just check out and go back home. But that's a little bit of a view into a type 7 person. I know that because I have a 7 wing, and so that's something I would do in a heartbeat. Matter of fact, it is something I have done multiple times. Just need milk from Walmart. Decide, you know what? I'm gonna take a very, very scenic route to Walmart. Instead, I drive like an hour before I actually get to Walmart. And then when I get to Walmart, walk around for about another hour before I just pick up the milk and check out when that's all I need, and then go home. So yeah, I know a little bit. Like I said, I know a little bit from experience because I have a 7 wing, and so I kind of understand what 7s go through and how they feel. So yeah. Moving on. Let's talk about the deadly sin for type 7 and how they deal with fear. With fear being, that emotional response of the head center that starts to take over a person's response as they start to disconnect from their true self within the head center. All right. So let's start with the deadly sin. A 7's deadly sin is gluttony, and not food gluttony. A 7 isn't sitting at a buffet just devouring everything in sight because they can. If you know someone who's a 7 and they go to a buffet and they devour everything in sight because they can, it's not because of their Enneagram, it's because of something else and there's a bigger problem and they need some help. Um, Forgive me, Lord. That came off a little bit harsher than I intended to. But if you know someone who's a 7 and they're a food glutton, it's a different problem. So talk to them and seek help for them because gluttony is a big problem. Um, Jesus Christ, I just said gluttony is a big problem. Horrible word choice. Gluttony is a problem. This is what happens when you get a raw recorded podcast episode with no editing. Don't you love it? I'm in the room by myself. Maybe it's that cup of coffee I just had that's making me like this as I record these episodes. But anyway, 7s aren't food gluttons. They are gluttons of life experiences. Whether that's going on a once-in-a-lifetime cruise or jumping off a cliff into a lake or driving a F1 car around a racetrack. If you don't know what an F1 car is, it's a Formula One car. It's one of the fastest, actually is the fastest race car known to man. Or maybe it's something else completely. If it's a life experience, a 7 is going to be a glutton of it because 7s really want to experience all that life has without stopping. So, to put this in perspective, a 7 might take a cruise. As soon as they get off at a destination of that cruise, they'll find a cliff, jump off into the lake. As soon as they get out the lake, they'll dry off, put on new clothes, and they'll go find a racetrack that has a Formula One car that they can drive. They boom, 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 one life experience after another without stopping is here, 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 here. Let me experience everything life has without a moment of stopping. They 7s are just very enthusiastic about life. And that's why I like to call them the adventure people. I don't know why I keep on doing that, but that's why I like to call them the adventure people. Braylon, can you talk normal? People are listening to this episode and they don't want to hear you go on a bunch of tangents and be special. They just want to hear you deliver the content and get over it. Okay, but back to type 7s once again. Where was I? All right. So yeah, let's talk about fear now as that emotional response. So when I say for the head center, fear is the overwhelming emotional response that happens that takes over their a type within the head center's kind of decision making process when they disconnect from their true self. What I'm just saying is when type within the head center is unhealthy, fear feels the decisions. Fear is, like that driving factor within their decision making process. So for 5s, they cope with fear by isolating themselves, and 6s cope with fear by looking for external sources of security. But 7s cope with fear by keeping their mind occupied with all their exciting possibilities. That's why, they're bam, 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 nonstop. Here's this one thing, here's this thing. Let's do this. Now we're doing this. Now we're doing this. Now we're doing this. And so I can tell you, when a 7 gets in that mode, I know how bad it is for me just having a 7 wing, and for somebody to be an actual full-fledged 7 type, it's got to be bad. Because I know my friends probably hate me here at college because, like, when I get in that 7 wing, I'm like, let's go do this, let's go do this, let's go do this, let's go do this. And meanwhile, they're all like, let's just stay in tonight. Let's do it there. But, yeah, when my 7 wing comes out, it really comes out. And I'm like, all right, let's go here. Quick story. So this past year, I was floor president for guys within my dorm, which meant for the third floor, the north side of the dorm. I was in charge of basically making events to put on for the guys to enjoy and for to enhance the community. Which this year I've upgraded from floor president to president of the entire dorm hall. So whoop whoop, making big money moves here. But I was in charge of that for the past year and a half, and so I was doing location scouting for an event that we had this past spring semester on a Saturday uh, at a park. And I've been to this park many times, but I never actually walked the trail that the park has. And so, you know, I wasn't doing anything that Saturday. So I know my 7 wing came out. I was like, you know what? Let's be adventurous. Let's see where this trail goes, how far it goes. Um, well, come to find out, it goes way further than I expected. I ended up walking like 6 miles that day, and I still did not walk all the trail. So, yeah, um, my thighs, my butt was hurting because I didn't do any stretching because I wasn't intending to walk that long. So my thighs and my butt would hurt for like 4 days straight. I could not move. So, yeah, I was tight in my legs for a couple of days. So, little word of advice: if you decide to go on an adventure, walking down a trail, stretch, because you will probably don't know how long it will take. For me, I ended up walking 6 miles, um, and like I said, I wasn't even through walking the entire trail, so it was more than 6 miles completely in the trail. And so, but yeah, sevens are always boom, boom, bam. Here's this, here's that. Let's move on to this experience. Let's do this experience. Let's go to this experience. So that's how they cope with fear. They keep their mind occupied um, with all these exciting, exhilarating possibilities, all these options that they have to do to experience life. So I want to move on to talking about the levels of health of a type 7. But before I do talk about the health of a type 7, I want to briefly touch on the stress and security for type 7. So when sevens begin to disintegrate, when they experience stress, when they um, start to become unhealthy, they become perfectionists and they become critical like an unhealthy one. Um, During this, when 7 moves in the direction of disintegration, they start to blame other people for their problems and they lapse into this black and white thinking, um, which is not good. But I love that word, but it's always like, here's this, but there's better. On the flip side of that, when a 7 starts to experience growth and they become focused and fascinated with life like a healthy 5 would. Um, when they're moving in this direction of growth, 7s are more comfortable with silence and solitude. Um, so, yeah, that's pretty much all the basics of type 7s. So, yeah, we'll move on to talking about levels of health for now. Um, So let's talk about the levels of health for type 7. And I'm going to try to move to this briefly because this episode is already longer than I intended to be because I went on tangents and all that. But anyway, before we talk about their levels, I want to remind you that there are 9 levels of health for each type. And these 9 levels of health are divided into triads. You have healthy, average, and unhealthy. So levels 1, 2, 3 are healthy. 4, 5, 6 are average levels of health, and then 7, 8, and 9 are the unhealthy levels of health. And so and that goes for each type of the Enneagram. So, and I also want to remind you that anytime that I have discussed levels of health within this first season, and anytime I will discuss it in the future, when I refer to the levels of health, I'm referring to the top tier levels of health. So, always levels 1, 4, and 7. But they go much deeper than that. But when I talk about them here on this podcast, in the past and in the future, I'm really focusing on levels 1, 4, and 7, the top tier of each um, level, each triad of health. I think, yeah, you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, I hope you understand. A little bit confusing there, but yeah. So let's get back to the health of type 7s. So at their best, at their best level of health, 7s are deeply grateful and appreciative for what they have. They are just awed by the simple wonders of life. Healthy 7s know and understand that less is more. Um, Healthy 7s also have embraced a full range of emotions, and they are growing in their ability to accept life as it is rather than as they want it, as they desire it to be. And when type 7s are in a healthy space, they are not only fun and adventurous, but they are also spiritually grounded. They're practical and they're resilient. Average 7s, though, they start to reframe almost everything that is sad or that could be perceived as failure, and they reframe it and start changing it so that even the most negative narrative casts a positive light, that it seems like something that's really reassuring and affirming. Example of this could be, they weren't paying attention and while they were driving, and caused a 5-car pileup on the highway. um, an average 7 would do everything to reframe that to make it look like, this is something good actually, even though it's a bad situation. um, so uh, in a view of a Christian who kind of, that could be as a average type 7 who's trying to reframe that, could be, oh, okay, it was my fault, but because this wreck happened, uh, nobody was hurt, but at the same time, because it happened, I was able to preach, not preach the gospel, I was able to minister to people, and I prayed with somebody and they got saved. you know Horrible accident, reframing it to a positive event. That's just a example, vague, faint example of it, though, of how type 7 might reframe something. An average type 7 might reframe something to make it seem affirming, positive. But uh, at this level of health, at average level, a 7's happiness is found in anticipation, and their sadness is found in the reality that their expectations are rarely, seldom realized. Um, it's also at this level of health that a 7's restlessness begins to increase, which causes them to want to have more options available to them. So at average level, this is where a 7 is like, all right, here's all the life experiences I have already, but I want this, I want that, I want that, I want to add this to my plate, I want to add this to my plate. When they begin at average level, when they begin to experience and start become restless, that's where they grab at everything on the buffet and put it on their plate in terms of life experiences. Uh, Average 7s also find commitment a challenge, and they just have trouble finishing projects again because they're grabbing at all these life experiences. Like, all right, let's put this here on my plate, here on this plate. And if you ever been to a buffet, and if you're like me, you kind of try to fit all the food you can on one plate, so you don't have to keep on getting up. But in the end, you're really just kind of making yourself look fat because you're stuffing one plate with all the stuff. When you do that, you try to pick up one thing, but like as you eat, you try to pick up one thing, but like everything else is falling off the plate because you got so much on the plate. That's kind of how it is for uh, an average seven. They got so much that it's hard for them to finish, everything on the plate. But lastly, at the worst, a seven type sevens are desperate to quell their anxieties. They unhealthy sevens can be very impulsive and infantile, and at this they don't know when to stop being impulsive and infantile because they're unhealthy. Unhealthy sevens are also see themselves and their environment as inadequate. They avoid pain at all costs, which leads to them being irresponsible and seeking instant gratification. Unhealthy sevens are reckless and more prone to addictions than any other type, whether that's an alcohol addiction or pornography addiction or or shopping um, addict well addiction. They're prone to it. I want to say thank you to everyone who has listened to Enneagram Start podcast. It is hard to believe that the recap episode next week is the end of season one. This first season has been a fantastic one, but now that we've covered all the basics of the types, it's time to call it an end. But season two is going to be even better. Again, I thank you guys for listening to Enneagram Start podcast, and thank you for a fantastic first season. So the last thing I want to talk about in this episode is type sevens in relationships. But I just want to touch on this very briefly because I am going to do an entire series about relationships in season two about every type. So we'll be going through all the non-types again, but only looking at them in relationships. So having a relationship with a type seven person means that there is never a dull moment. There's a lot of spontaneity to a relationship, and if you are in a relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or a platonic relationship, you have probably experienced a lot of this spontaneity already in your relationship with this type seven person, because the truth is, if you're not ready to go somewhere within a moment's notice, a 10 seconds to say at the least, uh, your relationship with a type 7 person may not last very long, because type 7s are spontaneous people, and they're, all right, let's do this, go, go, go. Even though, I got this, I want to be spontaneous, I want to go do this instead. So having a relationship with type 7 really just adds excitement to your life. It brings out, um, I would say, some happiness, because you're not living this dull moment. Because sevens are always like, all right, let's do this, let's experience this, let's go here, let's do this, let's just have some fun, let's party all night long. That's the thinking of a type 7 person. Um, But the thing is about sevens, they despise confining relationships. They don't want to be in a relationship that puts them in a box, because sevens are type A commitment phobics. They don't like type 7 people, do not like commitment, period. Um, they don't want to be tied down. They don't want to be put in a box again, because they're always grabbing at life experiences. So they want to be able to move freely to from one experience to the next experience. Um, when it comes to ending a relationship with a type 7 person, though, um, it can be very difficult for that type 7. Uh, but even though it could be difficult, a type 7 person and their friends can walk away from a relationship together with hardly any difficult feelings towards each other. Uh, they can walk away without really saying anything negative about each other, uh, because sevens repress emotions, and it often that repression of emotion also often makes them seem callous or have a lack of empathy. But it's just, again, this idea, don't want to be tied down. So if I repress my emotions, that helps with me, not being put in a box, because here, um, I'm not, tied to this emotion. It's not saying, all right, here's like, this is not how I should experience life. This view of sadness, or this view of happiness, or this view of depression, because I'm not tied to my emotions. I can just do. I can feel this happiness here. I can feel this happiness here. Like, there's no sad emotions really for a type 7 person. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't feel um, sad emotions. In fact, sevens kind of are really counterintuitively attracted to people who have suffered, because these people possess an emotional depth that sevens yearn for, but they really just don't know how to develop it. Because for uh, type 7, they can enter dark emotional spaces, but they don't stay there for long. Um, it's only for a limited time that a type 7 will stay within a dark emotional space. And so that's why they kind of yearn for people who can do that, because they feel there's a deeper understanding by staying longer in that moment, um, which is true. And that thinking that you do learn more by experiencing dark emotions for a longer period and kind of thinking about them. But for a type 7 person, they just don't sit in these dark emotional spaces long enough to get any quote unquote life lessons from them. For type 7 people, entering these dark emotional spaces are always something that they do on their own terms, and they control every variable of doing so. You know, but that could translate to being, all right, for a type 7 person um, who wants to enter a dark emotional space. They'll say, all right, at 7 p.m. on July the 10th, I am going to shut off all the lights in my room. I'm going to lock the door. I'm going to put on some lo-fi music. Um, and I am going to only think about the emotion of sadness. Or I'm going to lock my door. I'm going to be by myself. I'm going to have all the lights on. And I'm going to put on some upbeat pop music. I'm going to only think about, you know, the emotion of happiness and how I lack it. Maybe not the best example of that, but Because that's not really a dark emotional space to think about happiness. Maybe it is. Maybe happiness is just something that's very dark for you. I don't know if it is. Oh my God, I'm gonna pray for you. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. Uh, yeah. Well, that's all for this week's episode of Enneagram Restorer podcast. But not only that, that's really kind of it for the season. With the exception of the recap episode next week. I mean, we've talked about all the triads. We've done an in-depth view of the triads as a whole. We've split up all the 9 types and look at those individually for an entire episode. We've went through all 9 types of the Enneagram already in one season, 15 episodes after next week. So it's been great. Again, don't miss next week, as it is the very last episode, because that's the recap episode. And in that episode, I am going to talk about some statistics about the show. You know, how many listeners we had. You know, talk about goals we had. I don't know if you see my social media post back in March, but in March I posted, some goals I had for this first season. And so we're going to see if we met those goals, if we fell short of those, whatnot. Going to recap all the types in like a minute. Highlight that's going to be happening, because I can not talk that short, but I'm going to try to recap all okay, so in 9 minutes, a minute for each type, I'm going to try to recap all the Enneagram types in the episode. And also, I'm going to play back some of the clips from an interview I did with one of my friends here on campus, Cameron Salazar. He was a type 2, and so I'm going to play back some of the best moments of that episode. So you don't want to miss next week. Not really going to be informative, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting, and it's going to be the very last episode of season 1. So don't miss it. I encourage you to listen to it as soon as it drops next Thursday at noon, 12 p.m. Central Time. It's going to be great. And before we go, as always, I want you to remember this: that the Enneagram doesn't define you, but it does bring restoration. It helps reshape your thinking and habits.